The hall was silent, yet filled with tension. Bright lights from the stage made every face in the audience clear, every breath almost heavy. The event was meant to be about global cooperation, about how leaders and thinkers could work together for progress. Sundar Pichai, quiet and humble, stood in the center with his hands gently folded. He had been invited to share his journey from a small home in India to leading one of the biggest technology companies in the world. People were waiting to hear words of hope and progress. But before he could even begin, an unexpected moment shifted the entire mood of the evening. Donald Trump, standing only a few steps away, leaned slightly toward the microphone. His voice, sharp and cutting, carried across the room. He spoke words that sounded like a challenge, words aimed at Sundar Pichai. The tone was not supportive, it was not encouraging. Instead, it felt like an attempt to belittle him, to remind him of his origins, to make him look small in front of the world. The audience gasped softly. Some looked uncomfortable, others whispered. Sundar's calm face showed no anger, but deep inside, the pain of being spoken to that way was undeniable. For a few moments it felt as if the air had grown heavier. Sundar's hands tightened slightly, but his eyes stayed steady. He had faced struggles before, moments of rejection, moments where people underestimated him. But this was different. This was not in a private room, not behind closed doors. This was on a stage where millions were watching, where every word could echo around the globe. The silence in the hall stretched long. It felt like the kind of silence that breaks spirits, the kind that leaves wounds. And then, a movement from the other side of the stage caught everyone's eyes. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, slowly stepped forward. His expression was calm, but his presence alone carried a weight that demanded respect. He did not raise his voice, he did not rush. He simply placed his hand lightly on Sundar Pichai's shoulder, a gesture that spoke louder than words. The hall turned quiet in a new way. No longer the silence of shock, but the silence of anticipation. People leaned forward, waiting for what he would say. Modi's voice was steady, warm and firm. He did not insult back. He did not mirror the harshness. Instead, he began with a story. He spoke of growing up in a small town, selling tea and listening to conversations of people who often doubted what a child from such a humble background could achieve. He spoke of how every person in the world carries within them the power to rise, to grow, and to lead with dignity. His words did not name anyone, but everyone understood the message. The insult had been answered, but not with anger. It had been answered with calmness, respect, and unshakable dignity. Sundar Pichai looked at Modi, and for a brief second, his eyes glistened. It was not just gratitude. It was a reminder that humility could be protected by strength, and kindness could be defended without cruelty. The audience, moved by the contrast, shifted their expressions. Some who had laughed awkwardly earlier now looked ashamed. Others who had stayed silent now began to nod. There was a quiet sense of admiration filling the air, the kind that grows when people witness not power, but grace. Trump remained still, his expression unreadable, but the moment had already changed. The hall no longer carried his words. It carried Modi's calm tone. It carried Sundar's silent strength. In that instant, the lesson became clear to everyone watching. True leadership is not about who can speak the loudest, who can strike the hardest, or who can humiliate. True leadership is about who can stand tall when others try to pull them down, and who can choose calm when provoked to anger. The audience broke into applause, not loud at first, but deep and steady. It grew stronger with every clap, as if the people themselves had realized that they were part of something bigger. They were not only watching three men on a stage, they were watching a lesson about respect, resilience, and dignity. Sundar stepped forward again, this time with a soft smile. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and gentle, but it carried across the hall with surprising strength. He said he was grateful, not for the insult, but for the reminder of how far he had come, and how many people had walked with him on that journey. He said that every time someone tried to make him feel small, he remembered the millions of ordinary people who dream big, who rise from humble homes, and who carry hope in their hearts. The crowd stood in respect. Some eyes were wet. The cameras caught every moment, and even those who were watching from across the world could feel the emotions. What had begun as an attempt to insult had turned into a moment of unity, of strength, and of kindness. The story of that night was no longer about the words that tried to hurt, but about the calm response that inspired. This was only the beginning, because no one knew that the night would hold many more twists, moments of doubt, and powerful turns. But for now, Part 1 closed with a feeling that something unforgettable had just started, something that would echo far beyond this stage, into the hearts of millions who needed to believe in respect and humility again. The applause from the hall slowly faded, but the echo of that moment still lingered in every heart. Sundar Pichai stood tall beside Narendra Modi, his eyes calm, his shoulders relaxed, but deep inside he felt a storm rising. He knew the evening was far from over. One insult had been turned into inspiration, but he wondered quietly if it was truly finished. Because in rooms filled with power, words often lead to more words, and silence can become louder than noise. As the event continued, the host tried to bring back the flow, inviting each guest to share their vision for the future. The audience leaned forward, their attention sharp now, because they had already seen tension on the stage, and they were waiting for what would follow. Sundar spoke gently about innovation, about how technology was not just about machines, but about people, about connecting villages with cities, students with knowledge, and families with opportunities. Every word he spoke came from experience, from the memory of studying under dim lights in his small home, from the days when his father saved every coin so he could pursue his dreams. His words touched people because they were not empty. They carried truth. But even as he spoke, Donald Trump shifted in his seat, his arms crossed. His face carried a mix of impatience and pride. When the host turned toward him, asking for his vision of global cooperation, Trump leaned into the microphone. Once more, his words were sharp again, this time not only aimed at Sundar, but also carrying a tone that seemed to challenge Modi himself. He spoke of strength, of power, of how nations must dominate rather than serve. He hinted that kindness was weakness, that humility had no place on the stage of leadership. His voice was firm, and his supporters in the crowd clapped quickly, though their applause was shorter and less certain than before. The tension returned. People could feel the clash of two worlds, the world of humility and respect standing against the world of pride and domination. Sundar lowered his eyes, unwilling to meet the sharp gaze. Modi, however, stood calm. He did not rush to answer. Instead, he let the silence stretch until the clapping faded on its own. Then, with steady hands folded in front of him, he began to speak. His words painted a picture of resilience. He said, true strength was not in how loudly one could shout, but in how deeply one could listen. He reminded the hall that the greatest leaders in history were remembered not for the insults they threw, but for the hope they gave. He told the story of a farmer who worked under the harsh sun, who never raised his voice but who fed hundreds with the sweat of his labor. He spoke of a mother who stayed awake at night, holding her child through sickness, never demanding praise but showing strength greater than any army. The hall grew quiet again, not because they were commanded to, but because the words reached them. Trump's face tightened, but he said nothing. Sundar looked at Modi, realizing that this calmness was not just for the stage, it was a way of living. Sundar's heart felt stronger, as if he too could face any insult, any challenge, without letting it crush his spirit. But then something unexpected happened. A member of the audience, a young student from a nearby university, stood up with trembling hands. His voice shook as he asked a question. Sir, how do we keep believing in kindness when the world keeps rewarding pride and arrogance? The question cut through the hall like a blade. It was the question many young people carried secretly, the question that had no easy answer. For a moment, even Modi stayed silent. Sundar looked at the boy and saw himself years ago, confused, uncertain. If kindness had value in a world where power often crushed the gentle, Trump leaned forward, almost smiling as if the boy's doubt proved his point. But Modi finally answered. His voice was soft, but each word felt like stone. Kindness may not win every battle, but it always wins the soul. Power can make people fear you for a moment, but respect can make them follow you forever. The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he sat down slowly. The audience clapped again, louder this time, as if to assure him that the answer mattered. The cameras caught everything. The moment was already spreading across social media, headlines forming. Modi responds with calmness, Sundar stands with dignity, Trump challenges with pride. Around the world, people watched with mixed feelings, some shocked, some inspired, some angry. But no one could deny that the stage had become more than just an event. It had become a battlefield of values, and yet deep behind the stage, some organizers whispered nervously. They feared the tension could grow worse, that the conflict might not stay only in words. No one knew what the next hour would bring. Sundar himself felt a strange weight, as if the story of this night had only just begun, and something bigger, perhaps even more painful, was waiting just ahead. The hall lights dimmed slightly as the program moved forward, but the air was still heavy with unspoken tension. Sundar Pichai stepped back, his heart steady yet restless, knowing that the words spoken tonight would follow him for years. Narendra, Modi stood calm beside him, his silence carrying the strength of 1,000 speeches. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp as if waiting for another chance to strike. The audience could feel it, too. Something was brewing, something beyond simple speeches. The host announced the next segment, a discussion on global unity. It was meant to be a balanced dialogue, but everyone in the room knew that the balance was already fragile. Sundar adjusted his microphone and began to speak. He shared how technology had helped connect people during hard times, how even in the darkest days of the pandemic, families stayed in touch, students continued learning, and businesses survived. His words were filled with gratitude, not arrogance. He spoke about how innovation meant nothing unless it lifted ordinary people, the workers, the farmers, the children dreaming in small towns. The crowd listened closely, nodding as Sundar's voice carried warmth. But before he could finish, Trump leaned forward once more. His words cut sharply, dismissing the value of humility, suggesting that power was the only language nations understood. He questioned whether kindness could ever truly lead in a competitive world. His tone was not just challenging, it was provoking, daring Sundar to fight back. The audience held its breath. Sundar's fingers tightened around the podium. He wanted to respond, but deep inside he knew that reacting in anger would only give strength to the insult. Instead, he paused, and that pause felt like eternity. His silence was powerful yet painful. Narendra Modi then took a step closer. He looked at Trump, then at the audience. His words flowed with calmness. He spoke about how India's strength was never built on domination but on resilience, on standing tall despite centuries of struggle. He said that nations, like people, must choose whether they want to be feared for a moment or respected forever. The hall erupted in applause again, not because he attacked anyone, but because he reminded them of a truth they all felt deep inside, but often forgot. Trump crossed his arms. But before he could reply, another unexpected moment unfolded. An elderly man from the front row rose slowly. His white hair glowed under the lights, his eyes moist but sharp. His voice, though weak, carried wisdom. He said, "I have lived long enough to see wars, to see hatred destroy families, to see pride ruin leaders. But tonight I see something different. I see a man insulted, yet standing calm. I see another man defending him with dignity. This is the leadership the world needs." The hall grew still again, but this time it was not silence born of tension. It was silence filled with respect. Sundar felt tears press against his eyes, but he held them back. That old man had unknowingly spoken for him, for the millions who had felt belittled but had kept walking forward anyway. And yet, even as the atmosphere softened, the storm was far from over. Backstage, whispers moved quickly between organizers. They worried that the clash might overshadow the event. They feared headlines that could turn political, dividing nations instead of uniting them. But no matter what they feared, the truth was clear. The audience was no longer here only for speeches. They were here to see how this battle of words, pride, and humility would end. Sundar knew the night was leading to something bigger. His heart reminded him of his father's words back in Chennai. When people test your strength, do not fight with noise, fight with dignity. Those words returned to him now, echoing louder than the applause, louder than Trump's challenges. He knew the true test was only beginning, and somewhere deep in his heart, he also sensed that another twist was waiting just beyond the curtain, something that could either heal the night or break it completely. The audience waited in silence, their eyes shifting between Sundar Pichai, Narendra Modi, and Donald Trump. Each man stood in the same space, but they carried different energies: calmness, dignity, and pride. The hall was filled with tension, but beneath that tension was something stronger: curiosity. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. The host, sensing the heavy atmosphere, tried to lighten the stage by asking all three men to share a personal moment that shaped their idea of leadership. It seemed like a safe question, but in truth, it was the spark that would open a deeper conflict. Sundar went first. His voice was soft but steady. He spoke of his childhood in India, of sharing one room with his family, of waiting hours just to make one phone call because phones were not common then. He shared how those experiences taught him patience and humility. He explained that leadership, for him, was about giving people opportunities so no child would feel left behind. The crowd listened closely, some even wiping their eyes. His story reminded them that greatness does not begin in palaces but in small homes where dreams are born. Then it was Modi's turn. He spoke of his younger days selling tea at a railway station, of watching travelers from around the country, and learning how every person carried a story of struggle. He explained how leadership for him was about service, about making sure no one's voice was ignored. He said a true leader does not stand above the people but walks among them. The hall erupted with applause, for many could see their own struggles reflected in his words. Finally, the microphone passed to Trump. His eyes narrowed and his voice grew firm. He spoke of his business career, of winning deals, of standing strong when others doubted him. But his tone carried more pride than humility. He said leadership was about being the strongest in the room, about never letting anyone make you look weak. The hall gave polite applause, but it was not the same warmth they had given Sundar and Modi. The difference was clear, and then a twist no one expected unfolded. A young woman from the audience raised her hand. Her voice trembled, but she spoke with courage. She asked Trump directly, "Sir, if leadership is only about showing strength, what happens to those who are not strong, those who need compassion more than power?" The question pierced through the hall. People turned toward her, some surprised by her boldness, others silently cheering her bravery. Trump leaned toward the microphone. His response was sharp, almost dismissive, suggesting that the world was not built for the weak. The words struck like cold wind. A hush fell across the room. The girl lowered her eyes, her face pale as if her courage had been crushed. Sundar's heart ached. He could not remain silent. He stepped forward and said gently, "True strength is not measured by how you treat the powerful, but by how you lift the powerless. I was once that child with no resources, no voice. I stand here today because people believed in compassion." His words wrapped around the young woman like a shield. She looked up, her eyes shining with tears, and the audience clapped loudly, louder than before. Modi added, his tone calm but unshakable, "The world does not grow when the strong dominate the weak. It grows when the strong protect the weak and help them rise. That is the only strength that lasts." His words struck deeply, and the audience stood in respect. Trump remained silent, but his tightened jaw showed his discomfort. He had tried to present pride as power, but the hall had just witnessed something different. The strength of humility, the strength of compassion. And just when it seemed the moment was closing, Another unexpected voice filled the air. An older journalist sitting near the press section spoke without a microphone. Yet the hall carried his words. "History will remember this night," he said softly. "Not for the insults, but for the answers that turned insults into lessons." The crowd broke into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, their clapping echoing like waves, filling the hall with an energy that no one could stop. Sundar looked at Modi, and for a brief second, he felt as if kindness itself had won a small battle on that stage. But deep inside, he also knew that battles never end with one victory. More challenges were waiting, more tests were coming. The hall still vibrated with applause, but as the sound slowly faded, a strange heaviness returned. People had just witnessed humility rise above pride, yet they sensed that the night was not finished. There was still unfinished tension on the stage. Sundar Pichai, though calm on the outside, felt his heartbeat rise. Narendra Modi stood steady, his face unreadable but his presence strong. Donald Trump leaned back with folded arms, his jaw tight, his silence louder than words. The host, trying to steer the event back into balance, suggested that each leader should share one message of hope for the young generation. The idea sounded simple, but everyone knew that it could reopen wounds. Still, the crowd waited eagerly. They wanted to hear words that could heal the doubt planted earlier in the night. Sundar went first. His voice was gentle but filled with emotion. He spoke about the boy he once was, walking the streets of Chennai, dreaming of touching the stars but unsure if he ever could. He told the young people that every small effort counts, every step forward matters, and that they must never let anyone convince them that kindness is weakness. His words brought quiet tears to many eyes in the hall. Then Modi took the microphone. His tone was calm, his words deliberate. He reminded the youth that their strength was not only in knowledge, but also in character. He said that success without respect is empty, and that humility is not about bowing down, but about standing tall without arrogance. The hall erupted in applause, his words striking deep into every heart. Then it was Trump's turn. His voice carried pride again, but this time sharper than before. He told the young generation that winning was everything, that only those who dominate are remembered. His words echoed like iron across the hall, but they did not receive the same warmth. Some clapped, but many stayed silent, uncomfortable with the message. And then, a moment no one expected happened. From the corner of the hall, a young boy stood up, his clothes simple, his voice shaky but brave. He said, "Sir, if winning is everything, then what about those who try their best but fail? Are they worthless?" His words pierced through the silence like lightning. The hall froze. For a moment, Trump looked at the boy and said nothing. He seemed unsettled. But before he could respond, Sundar walked toward the boy. He knelt slightly to meet his eyes and said, "Failure is never the end. I failed many times before I stood here. Failure teaches us more than victory ever could. You are never worthless if you keep trying." The boy's eyes filled with tears and the audience clapped loudly, some even standing. Modi then added, "The measure of a person is not how many times they win, but how many times they rise after falling. Even the strongest leaders have stumbled. What matters is the courage to stand again." The applause grew louder, waves of clapping spreading through the hall. Trump shifted uncomfortably, but the stage had already changed. The boy's question had exposed a truth that could not be ignored. Kindness and resilience had spoken louder than pride. The hall no longer looked divided. It looked united. But just as the applause reached its peak, another unexpected twist shook the evening. The lights flickered. For a moment the stage went dark, and a nervous murmur spread across the hall. When the lights returned, the sound of distant protest could be heard outside. A group had gathered beyond the walls, chanting loudly, demanding attention. The audience turned restless. Organizers rushed behind the curtains. The night that had already carried so much tension was now about to face something even bigger, something no one had prepared for. The sound outside the hall grew louder with every passing second. Chants and shouts broke through the walls, rattling the calm that had been built inside. The audience turned their heads nervously. some whispering, some shifting in their seats. The organizers rushed toward the exits, trying to understand what was happening. The leaders on stage, Sundar Pichai, Narendra Modi, and Donald Trump, stood still, the spotlight pressing down on them as the noise outside shook the very air. Sundar's eyes softened with concern. He knew that voices of protest always carried pain, and pain was never born without reason. Modi remained calm, though his hands tightened slightly behind his back. He understood that the real test of leadership often came not on the stage, but in moments when people's anger and fear demanded answers. Trump, however, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. His face carried irritation more than concern, as if the chants outside were an insult to him personally. The host hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should the event pause? Should security clear the space, or should they continue? Before any decision could be made, the doors of the hall shook with the pounding of fists. The audience gasped. A wave of fear rippled across the room. And then, in that tense moment, Modi stepped forward. He raised his hand gently, signaling everyone to stay calm. His voice, steady and low, filled the hall. "Let us listen," he said. "Leadership is not tested by how we silence voices, but by how we hear them." The hall grew silent again, though the chants outside grew stronger. Sundar nodded, adding softly, "Sometimes people shout because they feel no one is listening. If we ignore them, we prove them right. If we listen, we show them they matter." His words brought quiet comfort to the audience, who now waited with anxious patience. The organizers opened the doors slightly, and a small group of protesters was allowed inside. Their faces were tense, their voices filled with frustration. One young man stepped forward, holding a placard with shaking hands. His voice cracked as he spoke. "We are tired of promises. We are tired of leaders who speak about unity but forget the poor, forget the powerless. We came because we want to be heard." The hall held its breath. Sundar's eyes softened. He saw himself in that young man, saw the same hunger for fairness, the same longing to be noticed. He walked slowly toward him, each step heavy but calm. When he reached the young man, he lowered his voice so that it was gentle but firm. "I was once like you," he said, "angry that no one saw me, afraid that my voice did not matter. But I learned that shouting is not weakness, it is courage. You are not forgotten. Your voice matters here tonight." The young man's eyes filled with tears. The audience began to clap softly, moved by Sundar's humility. Then Modi added his words, calm yet powerful. "The poor are not a burden. They are the foundation of a nation. We cannot speak of progress without them, for they carry us all on their shoulders. I have seen hardship. I have lived it. I promise you, your struggle is not unseen." The protesters looked at each other, their anger softening into relief. The hall, once tense, now filled with quiet admiration. But Trump, watching silently, suddenly leaned forward to speak. His words were sharp. "If you want to be heard, you must fight harder. You must demand power, not sympathy." His voice carried pride, but it also stirred discomfort. Some in the audience frowned, others shifted uneasily, and in that moment, the difference between the three men became clearer than ever. Sundar offered empathy, Modi offered dignity, and Trump offered pride. The crowd knew they were not only witnessing a discussion, but a clash of values that would be remembered far beyond this night. The young man lowered his placard slowly, his voice trembling as he said, "Thank you, sir," looking toward Sundar and Modi. The protesters sat down quietly, no longer shouting but listening, their anger now replaced with hope. And yet deep inside, Sundar felt a strange unease. He knew that storms never vanish so easily. Tonight had already shown insults, doubts, and protests. He feared that something even greater, something unexpected, was still waiting in the shadows of the night. The hall had grown calmer after the protesters sat down. But beneath the surface, everyone knew the night was building towards something unforgettable. The audience leaned forward in their seats. The cameras stayed locked, and millions around. The world continued to watch, waiting for the final moments. Sundar Pichai stood quietly, his eyes thoughtful, while Narendra Modi remained steady beside him. Donald Trump sat with his arms folded, his face carrying a mixture of frustration and pride. The host asked one final question, a question meant to close the night but instead opening a new storm. What is the true meaning of leadership in today's world? The words echoed through the hall, and a deep silence followed. It was the kind of question that could not be answered lightly. It demanded truth. It demanded courage. Sundar stepped forward first. His voice was soft, but every word carried weight. Leadership is not about standing above others, he said. It is about walking with them. When I look back at my life, I remember the faces of my teachers, my parents, the friends who helped me when I had nothing. I am here because of them, not because of me. Leadership means remembering that no journey is walked alone. The hall filled with gentle applause, the kind that grows not from excitement, but from deep respect. Modi then spoke, his tone calm and unshakable. For me, leadership is service. When I sold tea at a railway station, I did not know I would one day stand on stages like this. But I learned that every hand you serve, every person you respect, makes you stronger. A leader who forgets humility forgets humanity. A leader who forgets humanity loses everything. His words swept through the audience like a wave. People stood, clapping, some with tears shining in their eyes. Then Trump took the microphone. His voice rose with pride, his tone sharper than before. Leadership is about being the strongest, the one who never bends, the one who wins at any cost. The world does not remember the weak, it only remembers the powerful. His words echoed, but this time the response was different. The audience stayed silent. No applause came. The contrast between pride and humility had been made clear, and the people's hearts had already chosen where they stood. And then, the most unexpected moment of the night arrived. The young boy who had spoken earlier, the one who asked about failure, slowly stood again. His small voice carried across the hall, trembling but brave. "Sir," he said, looking at Trump, "you say only power is remembered. But tonight I will remember Sundar and Modi because they showed kindness. I will remember that more than power." The hall erupted in thunderous applause, louder than at any point in the evening. People stood, clapping, cheering, their faces lit with emotion. Sundar felt tears in his eyes, unable to hold them back this time. Modi placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, their shared silence saying more than any words could. Trump looked down, his jaw tight, but he could not silence the truth that had just been spoken by a child. The cameras caught every second. Around the world, millions watched as humility defeated arrogance, as kindness proved stronger than pride. The story of the night was already spreading, not about insults, not about division, but about the quiet strength of respect. As the applause grew, Sundar leaned into the microphone one last time. His voice was steady, though his eyes were wet. "Tonight, we have all seen that words can hurt, but they can also heal. Let us choose to heal. Let us choose to lead with respect." Modi followed with his final words. "History does not remember those who shouted the loudest. It remembers those who gave hope. Let us be remembered for hope." The hall shook with standing ovations, people clapping, cheering, even crying. The protests outside had ended. The doubts inside had been silenced, and the stage had become a symbol of resilience and kindness. That night, when the lights finally dimmed and the leaders walked away, the message remained. Leadership is not measured by insults or domination. It is measured by humility, respect, resilience, and kindness. And in the hearts of millions who had watched, one truth shone brighter than ever. True power is not in pride, but in compassion.